Welcome to Concept to Creation, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs who share their business journey. We'll hear what motivated them to turn their dreams into a business. They'll share stories from the trenches of business, from raising capital, creating products or services, navigating regulations, hiring employees, and managing competition and growth. We'll discover their successes and failures, and they'll provide advice for budding entrepreneurs. Now, here's your host and fellow entrepreneur, Mike Conrad.
Welcome back. I appreciate you being here. Welcome back to Concept to Creation. Today, I'm very privileged and honored to have my guest join me today. He is the person behind STI Electronics out of Madison, Alabama, and that would be Dave Raby. Dave started the business with his father, Jim Raby, the iconic Jim Raby that most people in this industry know if they're older than, about my age anyway. David now runs STI Electronics, and I would like to welcome him as my guest. So, David, thanks for being here.
All right. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So, it's hard to start a business. It's hard to run a business. It's hard to grow a business and sustain a business. None of those come easy. I think it's even harder to take over a family business, particularly from your father, who was, as I said earlier, iconic. He was definitely an icon in this industry. We'll get into more of that in a little bit. And at some point, you took over the family business. I know your father passed a few years ago, I believe.
2017.
Yeah. So obviously you were running the business, and I'm assuming that you were running it before your father passed.
Yes.
There was a handoff at some point. So I want to get into that. I think that it is, the stakes are high, and there's a lot of eyes on you because, it's kind of like those memes. You have one job. Don't screw this up, right? Because
like you said, we can get into it in a little while, but there were multiple handoffs.
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, was it a handoff? I'm coming. Was it a handoff? Oh no, I'm coming back. No, you can have it. No, I'm coming back. It was the long goodbye, right? From the business. Like yeah. Well, let's kind of go back in time. Before you entered into the family business, what did you do?
Actually, I always wanted to be an airline pilot, which very, quite similar to what I ended up doing. Not really, but
I don't know. I think flying is less dangerous than running a business.
Yes, by a lot. But no, I went to college with that in mind. Got to college, was on the flying team in college, which we competed against other schools, and had a good time doing that, but learned that I really didn't like being told that you've got to fly at 9 o'clock this morning and you've got to go to this city and you've got to come back to this city and, you've got to do 3 landings and all of this kind of thing. I like going up on a nice day and just tooling around looking at things. So just figured, okay, if I get hired by Delta, they're not going to let me just go out on a nice day and take the plane to the Bahamas. They're going to have a little more demanding schedule.
I can see the announcement from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to circle over the Grand Canyon for the next 3 hours. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
I want to tool around up here.
Yes, and it's raining where we're supposed to be going. So
we're not going. We're going to Hawaii.
Yes. But so no, I quickly decided, okay, maybe that's not going to work. But I was still fascinated by airplanes and airlines. So it's like, okay, I'll just run an airline. And got out of school, worked for a commuter for a little while, then got hired by Delta in sales and was like number 45,000 in seniority and was having a good time, but wasn't patient enough for 44,999 people to retire or die so I could run the place. And decided, well, really it's business I like. And around that same time, my dad was looking at getting out of what he was doing. And STI which actually we started it as Soldering Technology International. We did change the name later to STI for some reasons we can get into later. But he was with the Navy, and for a couple of years, even while I was with Delta, we had been doing seminars around the country. And so I'd take a week's vacation, and he'd take a week's vacation from the government, and we'd hop on airplanes and we'd go do a seminar in Boston, and then we'd go do one in, Austin, Texas. And then six months later, we'd go do one in Orlando and Seattle or wherever.
And here's your father, Jim Raby, up on the screen right here, in case those who have never had the opportunity to meet him, haven't met him. There he is right there.
And actually, I think if you look back over my head in this video, you see him back there too. So
yes, you're right.
He's watching over me all the time. But we would go out and do those seminars. It was strictly part-time. At that time, we never thought the business would be around 40 years later. That wasn't the plan. We were each doing our own thing. And we'd get a few checks in. It was expensive to market in those days because there was no internet or anything like that. So, he would do the technical part. I was the logistics guy that would end up operating the slide projector and making sure the slides were facing the right direction, and change the things of slides as he finished one. And so we did that for about 2 or 3 years. And he decided then to leave the government, started Soldering Technology full time. I was working there at night. I'd work my day job at Delta, and then I'd go work with him. He was doing consulting work and that kind of thing. And I was making microsections and taking pictures of things as he would go out in the field and bring something back. And, I really didn't know much of what I was looking for. It was kind of what I'd learned from the seminars I'd been to. And, but as we did more and more of that, I started having more fun. And so I eventually quit my job at Delta and came over to STI full time. And we keep talking about my dad. My mom was in it also.
Ellen is your mom, right?
Yes, Ellen. And we really were a family business. It was the three of us. Just to show you kind of how naive we were on what we were doing. The plan was when we started the business, we would each own a third of it. And because he was working for the government at the time we started, and we were working with some government contractors, he wasn't allowed to own any of it, just for legal purposes. So we gave my mom 51% and I took 49%. And Dad didn't own any of it, but he was the face of the company. After he got out of the government and we could split it up, we had discovered that it was good to have my mom own 51%.
One-owned company.
We never changed that.
Yes.
So my dad always said that, we started the company together, but he was the face of it and he never owned anything. He just got a paycheck from us.
Yeah.
But
so your dad, just to fill in the details, your dad, my first memory of meeting Jim was when I was involved on the EMPF's manufacturing committee with Bob Matson and my dad there. And I think your dad, I think this is an accurate statement. He is not only your dad, he's also the father of many military standards that were written. Specifically, my memory was Weapon Spec 6536. And he had a phrase that it just cracked me up. In the standard, basically, to paraphrase it very loosely, this is the way you need to do this. Any other way is subject to review and disapproval. That would totally just turn someone off, right? It's like, in other words, this is the way you're going to do it, right?
Yeah, I don't remember that particular phrase, but I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah, yeah.
For years, when I would meet somebody, they would say, "Are you Jim Raby's son?" And I would kind of have to read the room to see if I should be backing up because I was going to get punched.
Right. Do you lie or do you tell the
Or
truth?
if I was going to get hugged. And,
Right. It could go either way.
either one.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to back up a little bit on him, him and my mom both, their childhoods, they were sharecroppers. They worked in the cotton fields in Madison County, Alabama, and picked cotton, chopped cotton, and I mean I'm out in Alabama heat now, as little as I can be, and it's just miserable out there. But they grew up working in that. He graduated from high school, joined the Navy, became an electronics technician, was on a ship toward the end of the Korean War, but then came back and was looking for a job. And with his electronics training, he was lucky enough to find one with the Army Ballistic Missile Agency here in Huntsville, which consisted of some really smart people, including a bunch of German scientists, which turned out to be Dr. von Braun's team. And they later changed their name from Army Ballistic Missile Agency to NASA, and built the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo spaceflight program. So I grew up as a NASA brat, growing up through that. Dad, he was the one that he did electronics for them, but he helped develop their training programs and helped do standardization to make sure they were doing things the same way. Because, here in Huntsville, we think of a lot of things being built here, but they were also a lot built in California and in Massachusetts and all other places, and they had to be able to plug into each other. So they had to be built the same way. And he was responsible for making sure the contractors were building things the same way every time. So he did a lot of the spec writing and setting up training programs, which came into play later. As time went along, which would have been about the mid-'70s, which was after the Skylab program, but before the space shuttle, he had decided that he was ready to go do something else. And the U.S. military was having some reliability issues on electronics. So they came recruiting, and they took us to all kinds of great places of showing us, if you come with the Air Force has some really nice bases around the country. And they took us to those and showed us, you can live here and you can play golf here and you can do all of this. Navy did the same thing. And then it came time to actually offer us a job. And the Navy offered us China Lake, California, which wasn't one of the ones they had taken us to see. I mean, there are some good things about China Lake, but it was not what really we had envisioned. So it's like, okay, what's the Air Force going to offer? And they offered Minot, North Dakota. So that's how the Soldering Technology branch ended up at China Lake.
Interesting.
And
so they show you the exotic bases, and then they give you China Lake, which is in the desert, Ridgecrest area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And like I said, there are some good features about China Lake. It took us a long time to discover some of those because it was not, first off, lake is a misnomer.
Yes. Yeah. Lake. It's not even a relative term. Yeah. That's really not a lake.
It's a huge beach, just no water.
No water. Right. But at least you're not, at least you are avoiding the Alabama humidity out in China Lake,
there is
right?
no humidity there. But at 115, it really doesn't matter that much. I mean, there's the old Johnny Carson line of there's no humidity in your oven, but you don't see your Thanksgiving turkey smiling about it.
That's right. I just got back from the river, as we call it, the Colorado River near Parker, Arizona, a few days ago, and it was 117 degrees. And there's no relief. You can't drink your way out of that. You can stay in the river, but if you go on a boat, the faster you go, the more hot air is just hitting your face. There's very little relief except floating in the river, right?
Right. And if there's any breeze, it's bringing sand with it.
Yes, exactly right. So you were kind of a desert rat
Yes.
for a long time.
But Dad set up the Soldering Technology branch there, and one of the places he always talked about he went into was General Dynamics in Pomona. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like they were working to 15 different contracts for the military, and they were doing it to 17 different standards. And his idea was, let's make one standard so everybody can build to one standard. And
did that become the weapon spec? Is that where 6536 came from?
6536 was the main Navy one.
Right.
And they first had to unite the Navy, but then Mill Standard 2000 came along.
Yes.
Which Dad always told the story that the way that was named was his boss. He presented the idea to his boss, and his boss, this would have been in mid to late 70s. And his boss says, sure, you can go do that. There's no way you'll be done before 2000. And that's where the Mill Standard 2000 came from. But the
not quite an inspirational name, right? It was more of a, you'll never get it done name, right?
Right. But, the idea was if you're a government contractor, you shouldn't be asked to be working to a different standard for every contractor working on. So this was a unifying thing on that. And just a story that he always liked to tell also, contractors, every time he changed something, they hated it. That because their way worked and there's no way anybody else's way would ever work.
Right.
But there was a company here in Alabama that made fish finders. And every time he would write a new paragraph or a new section for the mill standard, he would come back to that fish finder company and get them to implement it as a process. And they basically didn't know that it was a military document. They just saw it as a good business practice.
So they must have had the most reliable fish finders on the planet.
Exactly. And so it worked out great for everybody. And then he'd go back to a military contractor and they would say, no, this won't work. And he'd say, look, I've got this history showing it will, and you're going to reduce your rework and you're going to increase your reliability, all of that. So there are fish finders that have been made in Alabama that have been made to the best military specifications.
That's great. So at some point, Jim decides to take his company further and kind of separate it, or at least add another component outside of the military. Originally, STI was set up in San Dimas, California.
Yes.
And then moved to Alabama. So
right.
What was the reason for the move from California, Southern California, just San Dimas, for those who don't know, is about 40 miles southeast of Los Angeles, not in the desert,
No.
up against the foothills. And
right.
So what caused the move from there to back to his roots, back to Alabama?
Well, I don't want to say anything bad about your home, but
I don't live in San Dimas, so I'm okay.
Well, okay. California is an expensive place to be in business. There are, there are a lot of regulations, and there are a lot of over regulations that are there. When we first picked out San Dimas, there were an awful lot of government contractors in the Los Angeles area. And as time went on, we realized we were getting on airplanes more and more, and they had moved out of the area. Now, they didn't move to a particular spot, and not all of them moved, but there wasn't a business case of, if we were starting all over, that was the place we ought to be. And, we did a search. We looked at 4 or 5 different cities, but this was always home. So, the tiebreaker was going to come back to Alabama.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I mean, I am sitting here right now. I'm 10 miles from a large Army installation, Marshall Space Flight Center, and then all the spinoffs that come along from those. And it's a great place for us to be. So much less restrictive than being in California, much lower cost. So never something we've regretted.
Yeah,
I always enjoy going back to California. But
yeah. Right now, there's an exodus from California at the moment. We get both. We get exits and entrances, and exits and entrances. There's ebbs and flows. Right now, it's the flow out. But renting a U-Haul right now, if you're leaving California, it's like $2,000, and if you're coming back into California, it's almost free because they're just trying to get their trucks back. So the only thing we have a lot of friends who are leaving California, and the trendy places to go are either like Eagle, Idaho, or Austin, Texas, or Nashville, Tennessee.
Right.
They're all just, and I tell people, if you're going to go there, change your license plates before you get there. Do not show up with a California plate, because you're not greeted with open arms, because Californians are selling their homes that are, elevated prices, and then just driving up the markets everywhere they go.
Right. Yeah. I've got a daughter in grad school in Nashville, and prices up there are like what we were paying in California.
Yeah. It's just, we tend to do that. So did STI started as a small enterprise, so I'm guessing there was not a whole lot of major capital investment that had to be made. It seems to be a company that started small and eventually grew. So normally one of my standard go-to questions is, how did you raise capital? Did you get investors or VCs, or did you go to a bank, or was there a savings involved? This is probably not as potent of a question, because it probably just started organically. But did Jim have to raise money to start STI or Soldering Technology International back in the day, as it was called, or did it just kind of start organically?
We did not do any kind of fundraising. He was too young to get his retirement from the government, but he was able to get some kind of lump sum payment. So they had a little savings account that most of that became our startup money. The nice thing is, like I said, it was myself, my mom, and my dad, and none of us really made any money. So as long as we could get enough to live on out of the business, everything else went back into the business. So, you got to watch your cash flow, but we were able to survive those early days without having to get any kind of outside investors. We had, I remember it took a little while to buy all the desk and things, because, where you get the money for that. It was a long time before we had any kind of computer. My mom did all the books by hand and all that kind of thing. But no, we did not go out and do any kind of fundraising or anything like that. And as a result, we never had any outside ownership or anything like that.
That's great. What were some of the early business challenges? You talk about, kind of bootstrapping your way into the business. But were there any challenges that were unexpected, particularly in the early days?
Well, first off, not having any money, that limits what you can do. And Dad was the big dreamer. I was more the operations guy, and my mom was the realist. That, Dad would dream up something and convince me of it, and then Mom would remind us, we've got $16 in the bank. So, how are you going to do that? I would say one of the biggest surprises, because we were always very frugal because of the way we started, and we didn't have really much margin for error or anything like that. But one of the biggest surprises was we were always putting money back into the company. So I remember we had our second or third year, we had what we thought was a really good year. The profit showed really high, and for relatively speaking, and all of that. And we're thinking, this is good. and our CPA comes to us and says, you owe X amount in taxes. And we're like, we don't have that. How can we owe in taxes? Because we don't have any money. He says, you've got inventory, and inventory is the same as having cash. And it's like, okay, we didn't know that. And so the first time we ever had to borrow money was because we'd made a lot of money. And like I said, a lot is relative, but
sure. Well, I think a lot of entrepreneurs. Before I make that statement, do you consider yourself an entrepreneur, or are you? Did you get into this for other reasons? So, in other words, you said you always wanted to be an airline pilot, right? You never said I always wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So do you consider yourself an entrepreneur now? And did you before you got into this?
I do now. By the time I got into the business, I wanted to run a business. So yeah, I'd given up on I decided the airline didn't have to be the business.
Right. Okay. So
now, having said that, I've been at this 38 years now, and 38 years ago, I never thought I would be sitting here still doing this. I mean, it's not like we thought the business would go away or anything. It's just we never thought that far ahead. And, it's like, for me, I was leaving a job that I wasn't going to go very far in, I didn't think. And it was just, this was something to do. And, but it became the lifestyle. And now I can't imagine doing anything different.
That's great. What I was going to get to when I asked you about the entrepreneur statement is many entrepreneurs, I say young entrepreneurs, I don't necessarily mean chronological age, but young in their entrepreneurship,
right.
Really don't understand business finances. They don't understand income statements or balance sheets or cash flow statements or things like that, right? And I was guilty of that. I looked at two numbers on the income statement, on the P&L. I looked at the revenue and net. I don't care about anything in between.
Right.
And I always thought that if you have a net that's greater than zero, a black number rather than a red number, you're doing great. And of course you pay tax on the net, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean you have any money.
Right.
I took solace in my AR aging. Like, look, I got all this money coming in.
Right.
And you pay tax on that money. Accounts receivable is taxable if you're on an accrual system. It's taxable, yet you don't actually have it, right? It's in AR, it's in inventory, it's in payroll, it's in obligations, the stuff you put on the books. And all of a sudden you're having to pay tax on money you don't actually physically have access to, right?
Right.
You can't send the IRS circuit boards, from inventory, right? You can't send them an IOU based on your receivables, right? So that was a hard lesson to learn.
Right.
How long in your experience with STI did it take for you to get really savvy, to figure out all those little gotchas and loopholes and all that?
Well, first off, I did ask our accountant about sending soldering irons to the IRS one time as payment, and he highly recommended against it.
You had plenty of those, right?
Yes, he highly recommended against it, and I think I was wise to follow his recommendation that time. You asking how long it took me to get savvy, you're assuming I am now, because I still learn things as we go along.
Fair enough, yes.
And I mean, the rules are always changing, and the last couple of years they've changed a lot. Probably though, 5, 6, 7 years, I really started understanding it better. It was less than that to learn that cash flow was more important than that profit number in some cases, because you can go out of business on a profitable job very quickly. And now, if it's not a profitable job, you're going to eventually go out, but a profitable job can make it happen just as fast, if not faster.
I want to touch on that. I'm so glad you brought that up. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. But before I get there, you mentioned Jim, your father, was the visionary of the company, and
Right.
your mother, Ellen, was kind of the more pragmatic, like,
Yes.
here are the numbers, Jim. Right? So there are several types of entrepreneurs. There are conceptual, creative people. Those are the visionaries. There are the tactical, logistical people, strategic, maybe, that just gets things done, the worker bees. I find that, and I don't know if Jim fell into this category or not, but I find that people who are strategic, people who are visionaries, are also very frustrating to work with, because people like that, like I am, tend to start a lot of projects, but they're not really interested in finishing them. They're like little fire starters, right? They just start all these fires, and then it's someone else's job to take them over, because we are interested in the new, in what hasn't been done before. We're not really interested in making it work mainstream. Was that your father? Was he that type of person that lit a bunch of fires?
You just described him very well. He started a lot of fires, and a lot of my job was to figure out which ones we wanted to keep going, because he had a lot of good ideas. He had a lot of bad ideas too, but he had a lot of good ideas, but we weren't in a position to do all of them. And some ideas, just for a variety of reasons, didn't fit in with what we were trying to do, or seemed realistic to us. But my job kind of became, okay, which ones are we going to do? How are we going to accomplish it? And that type of thing. So I'm the more tactical and pragmatic one.
And strategic, it sounds like, too,
he
right?
was the dreamer one.
Yeah. Well, do you agree with this, that someone like your father, that is the visionary, that is very conceptual, can start a company because they can create something out of nothing, and they don't let the facts get in the way, right?
Right.
They just pull a china shop. They just do it. And people like yourself, who are strategic and logistical and tactical, can keep a company going. But your father, probably alone, left to his own skill set, his own talents, probably would have a hard time growing a company and sustaining it over years. And someone like yourself might have a hard time starting something from scratch, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
That's a very fair statement. I mean, Dad and I, and like I said, you had to include my mom in there also.
Yep.
We made, and I think attitude-wise still make a great team, because our strengths are different. And we would, we had the advantage of being family. So there's good and bad about a family business. But the good thing is, there's nobody I ever trusted more than my mom and my dad. So, and they felt the same way with me. And so we knew we were always working for the same goal and trying to get to the same place. We had disagreements, but we always understood that we were all trying for the best for each other. You're exactly right. I think without me, Dad probably would have done a lot more wild and crazy things, and probably would have made a nice living for himself. I don't know that there would have been much of a company along with it.
Yeah.
He would have had fun as a consultant.
Right. Now that makes sense.
And would have done great at that. Me without him, I'm not sure exactly what I would be doing, but it probably wouldn't have been involving solder.
Right. Well, you may have been up in that cockpit. Who knows?
Well,
right?
It could be. I mean, my dream job's always been playing power forward for the Lakers, but so far they haven't called.
Anything is possible. Stay by the phone. You talked about, family business, and sometimes there's disagreements. In your world, does the business find its way at the dining room table, or has there some type of separation?
We never had any separation.
24/7 business.
It was the dining room table. It was Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner. It was if we ever happened to go on vacation together, anything like that. And I was single up until we moved back here to Alabama. So for those first several years, it was, cliche, but it was like I was married to the business.
Sure.
I didn't really have much of a life outside of the business, and it was working, if it was 10 hours a day or 16 hours a day, that's what you did. And, I didn't really have any reason to do anything else. And then I got back here and got married, and it added my wife, Sheila, to the equation. And she has been good about, let's drop this subject for the next couple hours while we enjoy this time together.
Yeah, right. Because she didn't grow up in that environment. Right. That's not normal to her, right? Right. She didn't grow up with that. So
yes.
Yeah, that's probably good for your marriage. My wife and I kind of have the same thing. I bring, obviously, to say I don't bring business home would be a fallacy, because I bring things that are really bothering me or really making me happy, right? The minutia of the business stays at the business. We don't talk about that, but just the big worries or the big celebrations, they kind of make it home. Mm-hmm. You talked earlier about growth, or suggested that. That's where I can see a difference between your father's personality, which is much like mine, and your personality. Your father would probably say yes to every job he could get.
Right.
But the most people, younger entrepreneurs, don't realize that sometimes you can't afford to grow, or you can't afford to grow fast, because when someone takes on a new contract or a new job or a new customer, they may have to scale up. They may have to buy more equipment, more space, more employees. So how did you work as a throttle between the forces that are trying to push growth as fast as possible and the natural forces that limit growth, like cash flow?
But no, I learned to forecast cash flow. I learned the importance of cash flow. I'm not sure, it's still a very hard thing to forecast, simply because people never pay quite as fast as you think they're going to be, and it always requires a little more than you think it's going to, and all of that. But you can get a good idea of which direction the cash is headed. And we were able to skip some jobs. We were able to go out and, if you needed to, finance some jobs with the bank. Sometimes we were right on those, sometimes we were wrong. That's, I don't think any of us have ever been right on everything. So, we have we've come up with some new projects over the years, and at times you'd be able to look over and say, hey, look, that's a $20,000 doorstop sitting over there, because it's a project that never went anywhere. But
well, I've always said it's not bad to fail. You just need a few more successes than failures.
Yes.
I think you learn from failure, right? I mean, right. How many times have you guys tried something and realized it wasn't a good idea, but you learned something from it?
Well, when knowing that we were going to do this interview today, I kind of made a list of different things we've been involved in, and it was a little scary how many things that we've done that we don't do anymore, because turns out in some cases they weren't that good to be in to begin with. And but luckily the good things, or the things that have been good for us, we've been able to stick with. And we still like to go try new things. Sure. And sometimes they work. And one of the expressions I've learned over the years is try to fail fast. And that didn't make sense to begin with, but don't keep pouring money into something that's not going to work, or that's not working. Try it, and if it doesn't start to turn around, get out of it.
Yeah.
And
it's funny, the things we learn, the hard way,
yes.
right?
because it's so easy to just keep shoveling money in that hole.
Sure. Well, I used to think, talking about shoveling money, I used to think the solution to every problem was growth. You grow your way
Yes.
out of a problem, right? And going back to the discussion of growth, is I think that is just a recipe for disaster. That is pushing the stick down,
Right.
and you're just getting closer to the earth. So your father, Jim, was the visionary of the company, and you were the kind of tactical guy. Who's the visionary now? Where does STI get its vision from today?
Well, hopefully I've gotten better at that, number one. But also, about 20 years ago, we were through some things we were doing. We were able to add two really talented people that have become my, for lack of a better term, I'll call them my right-hand people. But Diana Bradford and Mark McMean. And the two of those two, they're not family, but I trust them like family, and they're the same as family. Mark is the technical guy that can dream up things and go out and make them work. Diana is the operations person that, I go around and start fires now, and she's the one that figures out how to put them out or nurture them or whatever needs to be done. And that's been a good combination for us. And,
Sounds like the apple did not fall too far from the tree.
No. And it's funny. We always said Dad was the technical guy and I was the business guy. But over the years, I've gotten a lot more technical, and he was a whole lot better at business than he ever said he was.
Yeah.
And so we made a good combo there.
So there are, among other things, your training company, you do a lot of things at STI, but you're primarily an EMS provider, right? You're a contract manufacturer. Right. There are thousands of contract manufacturers out there, some, anywhere from tier 1 to tier 4. The market size for 2020 is worldwide is about $445 billion. It's a big business, and it's estimated to go up by 2027 to $790 billion. So you're in a big industry. How do you take STI and make it stand out from the hundreds, if not thousands, of other contract manufacturers that are out there? Many probably within 50 miles of you. So
Right.
How do you make your company stand out above all others?
I was excited to hear we're going to grow by $300 billion.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, we can just end it now, right? And go celebrate. Yeah.
No, that's a very good question. I mean, where we're different, or where we believe we're different, is in the reliability of what we build. A 85% of our business is for the U.S. government, various departments within the U.S. government, including the DoD. And they come to us because their hardware has to work. It's not something that you get a second chance on. And we're not the cheapest around, never will be. But we give somebody a good value with a product that works. And we have moved into some medical fields for the same reason, that those tie in together, the same kind of requirements the military has, that they're not allowed to fail. We've done some industrial products that have the same type of requirements on them. I don't think you're ever going to see us building, toys or cell phones or something like that. We're not set up to be competitive on that, and they don't require what we're good at. So, we're trying to make a name for ourselves within this part of the industry. And, I don't know, we may be able to double in size. I don't know that we'll go much bigger than that. But there is, the world keeps going more and more to electronics. Nobody ever says, I wish you could just make this bigger and heavier. Um, and we're good at making things smaller and lighter and more rugged. Um, the military likes that. Some other agencies like that. The medical field likes that. So that's what we're good at. And we just try to keep getting the message out that that's what we do and have happy customers.
One of my favorite business books is, and I don't read too many business books because I don't know, I like to have my own thoughts. But one that I really enjoyed was by Jim Collins called Good to Great. And he basically studied pairs of companies, publicly traded companies, so he had access to their finances. So Gillette and another razor company, and two paper companies, and two of these, and ones that, they looked at what all the companies that did very well had in common and what all the companies that did not do very well had in common. And he broke it down to 10 or 12 attributes on both sides. And one of them on the pro side was do what you could be the best in the world at. Don't do something because you can. Don't be an also-ran. Basically, and I remember in my company, there was a time when we decided that we wanted to be everything to everybody. And when you're everything to everybody, you're basically nothing to everybody, right? You're just not good at any one thing. You're kind of a mediocre company. And we made more money saying no to certain customers, to certain projects, than we've made saying yes. And I'm sure, well, that's exactly what you just explained. You can't build cell phones. You're not going to build, Nintendo game controllers for people. It's not your line of work. But what you do well.
Yeah, we've got 3 SMT lines, and every once in a while I come up with the wild idea of, well, they're not all 3 running all the time. We can get one of these low-cost jobs in, one of these simple jobs, and just run it on the line when it's not busy. And first off, we don't really even know how to bid on one of those. And but running a product down the surface mount line is not the hard part. The hard part is all the systems and policies and procedures that go into place to make sure that it meets something.
Sure. And
either we're going to ignore those for that, which is a bad habit to get into, or we're going to do it for free, which is a really bad habit to get into. And Diana and Mark will straighten me out and say, no, we're good like we are. And we'll just hold on, and we'll add another job that fits our requirements, and we'll get the machines busier that way.
I find that my experience is that customers that lead with price. So we answer the phone and they go, how much is your machine and how much cheaper can I get it? And can I have 6 months to pay for it? The whole thing, right?
Yep.
I find that those customers are better suited going to our competitors. It's the closest thing to a Trojan horse that we can send our competitors, because they'll eat them up from the inside.
Right.
And it took a long time for us to realize that, because we thought the cure to everything was more orders, right? Growth. And and the cure to everything is the right orders at the right time, right? It's just a lesson learned the hard way. How do you define success today? At the early days of business, you define success as covering payroll next week, right?
Yes.
A lot of little micro successes.
We never missed a payroll, although I can tell you myself, my mom, and my dad would take turns not depositing our checks sometimes, because there wasn't enough to cover that. But,
I think we've all been down that road. That is a rite of passage for a small business. So how do you define success today?
That's a good question. I mean, I have stepped back some from the business. Mark and Diana are doing a lot more. They've got teams under them that are doing great things. And, for 35 plus years, there was not an hour of my life that I was awake that I didn't think about STI. And we've reached a point where that's not necessarily the case anymore. Somewhere along the way, we were having some kind of crisis, And I realized Mark and Diana were as worried about it as I was. And that was comforting to me that I didn't have to worry so much if they were. So in some ways, that's been, from a personal point of view, that's been a success that I have been able to step back a little bit from it. Success financially, I'm never going to go buy an island somewhere. It's a little rock out in the middle of a stream somewhere or something. But the company is we're not worried about this next payroll coming up. We're not worried about the next jobs coming up. There are things economically worldwide that are out of our control that I have concerns over, but every company owner has that. I think I don't know that I'm answering your question, but we've reached a stability point where I'm not worried about we're going out of business tomorrow, and it may have taken longer to do that than I would like to. And to me, that's somewhat of a success.
The way I read your success, you didn't quite say it as strong as this, but I think your success is the fact that you can step back and not worry about the business, right? You can start enjoying the business and not micromanaging the business. You can work on your business, not in your business.
Right.
You could go to Hawaii and to PanPac and do a conference like we did last year.
Well, not last year.
Well, it was in February of last year. Yeah, it was a year and a half ago. This year we missed. Yeah. But I see that in your journey.
That is correct.
And I think that's hugely successful, right? To have the love of a business and the independence from it. You're not sucked into the minutia every day. And to have a team of dedicated people who will worry on your behalf. And do things so that you don't have to worry, I think is a definite sign of success. Finally, go ahead.
Let me interrupt there. For years, my title has been president and CEO. And my goal has always been to be more CEO than president, because I see president as the day-to-day stuff. Mm-hmm. The CEO is more the long-term thing and the overall thing.
Right.
And my title hasn't changed, but I think my mindset has shifted. And Diana handles more of the president stuff. Mark handles some of it, and I'm being more CEO-ish. And to me, that's probably the success of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you're spending your time up in the crow's nest. You're looking over the horizon, shouting your visions like your father did.
Yes.
What advice would you give to budding entrepreneurs? We'll wrap up with this. What if someone's thinking of, particularly these days, when the pandemic shook up a lot of careers and a lot of people found themselves out of a job, although that's quickly restoring. I think there was an opportunity for a lot of people to kind of jump ship and do something on their own. So what advice, knowing everything you've been through, what advice would you give either your younger self or a new entrepreneur?
If you've got a product or a service that people need, don't be scared to get out there and do it. Don't be scared to go out on your own. But figure out what kind of investment, what it's going to cost you, how long it's going to take, and then probably double both of those, because it's going to take more money and it's going to take more time than you think it is before it becomes successful. But don't be scared to do it. And, go with what you believe, but listen to your customers too, because you may start out in one direction and, the customer may come back and say, hey, this is really good, but if it would just do this instead. and be willing to make that. Don't be so stubborn that you can't make that adjustment, I guess, is the thing I would say. But the main thing is just know that it's going to take time, and it's going to take money, and it's going to take more of both of those than you think it will.
Sound advice, and I think that's a very true statement. David Raby, thank you so much for being my guest today on Concept to Creation. I appreciate the insight. I learned some things about your company. I've always admired your company from afar, and the work you do, and the status that your company has in our industry. You were a former SMTA president, right?
I was on the board for 6 years, and I was president for 4. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's max term out. You can't even step foot into that building anymore, right?
I had to take a year off in between the board and the presidency, so that was 10 out of 11 years. And I'm president of the Huntsville chapter now.
Oh, there you go. You see, you can't stay out. Well, the reason I brought that up is I think that's a testament to that you're just not one of these companies that are in it for the money, poach all the low-hanging fruit and then run. And there are several companies in our industry that are that way. I appreciate the fact that you give back to our industry, and it shows.
We are believers in that. If you come through our lobby now, you'll see the only SMTA award we've ever won is we won the corporate award. I forget exactly what it's called, but we won the IPC's corporate award the same year.
Wow.
And because we have multiple chapter presidents of SMTA, we've got probably 4 or 5 committee people for IPC, and we're strong believers in giving back, and because we're all in this together, and I'm not going to just sit here and make you do the work and try to take the benefits from it. So.
Well, you're certainly laying out a groundwork and setting the path for the next Jim and David Raby and Ellen Raby to start their businesses. So, well, thanks for being my guest today. It's very insightful. And audience, thanks for either listening or watching today's broadcast. If you are listening in your car and you want to see what handsome David looks like, go on our YouTube channel, just search Concept Creation, and we have a video version of this as well. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And we do release new episodes of this show, the Concept Creation show, on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday of each month. So David, thanks again for being my guest. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
And I was meant to be free, meant to be free.